Hey good people, Batavia here. We have our final full garden tour before we get to our first frost/freeze. That's a mouthful. It's all happening overnight as far as the shift in the weather. So we're gonna take a look at what's happening in the garden space. We're at the end of October here in Chicago before things change significantly in the garden. We'll start in the front yard and then we'll wrap up in the backyard. All right, let's dig in. Garden in its current state is actually coming to an end, and we have one last look at things. Our peppers have done so well this year. I have so much fruit still on the plants that we'll be pulling off, and the California Wonder once again did not disappoint. So I have California Wonder that ripens to red, and then there's one plant that I accidentally planted. I didn't realize that was the California Golden Wonder, which ripens to yellow. And so we'll pull those off. And then the last sweet pepper I had in this bed was the Triple Delight, which you can see that pepper back there. It's basically a bullhorn type sweet pepper, kind of long here. And it really produced some large peppers for me this year. So what I want to keep an eye out for is any vegetables that just really struggled all throughout the year. And I want to make sure I make a note of that to decide whether or not I'll give it another chance going into next year, or if I'll focus on things that I know have had better success with. In this space, I made a planting mistake back here in September, planting this lettuce, direct seeding it on the edge of this bed. I love doing this as a kind of garden design. It works really well in the spring when I have a lot more season left. So now it's on this edge and it has struggled to get light based on the large peppers here. We'll make a note of that. Works in the spring, not so much for the fall. And we have the green stalk, which is done swimmingly well. What I'm going to do in preparation for the cold weather. Cold for me, when I say that, I mean like 32 degrees Fahrenheit and below from a gardening perspective. Although for me and my person, 40 degrees is cold to me. But from a gardening standpoint, things that I believe will struggle at those temps, like my celery here, I will harvest. I was tempted to take the top tier off that I have basil in and bring that indoors. I've not made up my mind, but I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead, let it go. And by let it go, I mean harvest all of it and call it for the season, because it's tender enough where it won't survive those temps. For the rest of the green stalk planter, I plan on putting the frost cover on top of it. And this, in addition to this being used to help shift the planter, it works really well for the frost cover. And I'm all but sure the mint, which is so lovely, we should cut some of this and dry some of this before we have any kind of dance with cold weather. But the mint will do fine. I'm pretty sure the oregano will be fine. I'll probably take some of the parsley with me. But some of the things I do here are kind of testers, right? So if I cover it, will these herbs survive these colder temps? We'll see. But I'll take some to kind of hedge my bets so there's not total loss since it's done so well. All right, what I've deemed now my tester cabbage, since it has been in the garden so long, since April, and I've been keeping an eye on it to make sure that it's not splitting with the rain and that there aren't bugs that are kind of getting to it. So through the cover, this is just the tulle fabric, it looks pretty good to me. And whether this is actually working or not, I had this plastic bin on top of it to try to limit how much rain was getting on and near the plant. But I put this here way back at the beginning of the season, and I can't even remember my logic behind it because I don't normally plant like a single kale plant, but it really worked out. I have one more eggplant that I think is probably past its time. Yeah, if I look at the color of this. So it's probably seedy. It's still a little bit kind of soft to the touch, so we'll harvest it and see. Then I have all of the other celery, and so I may need to finally pull out my dehydrator for celery, because I'm torn between how long frozen celery really keeps nicely. It may get me through basically the fall holidays with using celery in dishes, but we'll see. So this is one of those moments where I'm pleased to still have tomatoes in the garden, although they're looking a little bit troubled. I'm pleased because last year this time I had long ago pulled my tomatoes out, and this year is more like normal, where I still have tomato plants. I'm pulling green tomatoes off of the plant. That's kind of what I'm used to in my area. I'm adding the strawberries to the list of decisions that need to be made over the winter. I kind of need to figure out if I'm going to plant more strawberries to kind of get the production I'm looking for, or if I'm just going to make it, as it has been, a few strawberries here or there. I kind of think about what that bed produces and what else I could get out of that bed, and I'm kind of leaning towards something else should be in that space. I may end up doing a green stalk of strawberries next year. I've seen some great results from that. So if I had planned better, I would have harvested my sweet potatoes last weekend. They've gotten soaked over the course of the last week with our on again, off again rain. And it's really not ideal to dig them up when the soil is that wet, but I can't let them stay in and freeze. So we're going to go ahead and be careful as I dig, but we'll get those out of the garden as well. I'm kind of excited about that. And then look what made a surprise return. The golden zucchini. So we'll get one nice size and then a couple of smaller ones off. So this is one of those questions. I think this is that a weed or a radish? That's a potato plant. Good grief. You can count on me for leaving a potato in the soil. Yeah, here too. I'm pretty sure though, not mature enough to have created potatoes, but we're going to see when we dig in there. Could be a nice surprise. So I was just going to comment on like how much space this squash plant is taking up. And for someone that gardens generally in a small space, the question every year is it really worth the real estate it's taking up? And I was looking to see if I had any more peppers over here. I don't know what happened. This is that red Baron pepper. I don't know if it's the pepper itself. I don't know if it's where it was placed, if the sweet potato vines choked it out, but it really performed poorly. So same thing over here with the sweet potatoes, where they've just gotten so wet. But you do what you have to do here when it comes to, I'll be very careful as I dig them up and try not to bruise any and give them an opportunity to cure and use throughout the season. I do want to give you all a quick update on the tomato plant, the Cherokee Purple tomato plant. In our September garden tour, I showed you what I'm sure of is this same tomato. And the question was, will I have enough time for it to ripen? So the answer is no. And not just focus on time, but more specifically how hot our weather has been or how hot it's not been. They've just not had a chance to ripen at all. So I'll pull green tomatoes off of the plant, which again is pretty typical for me when it comes to the end of October. Hi there, I'm good, how are you? So I do have a couple of red cabbages that once I pull away some of those outer leaves, I think will just be fine. Red cabbages are so pretty, but I've just not figured out the best way I like to enjoy them outside of coleslaw, putting them on some tacos or something. So I'm still trying to crack that code. So the backyard garden and all of its remaining glory. Yeah, so some changes since you all would have seen this last in the October tour. The last couple of videos, though, I focused on some of these areas. So if you saw those, then you know what some of this looks like, but not our pepper row. We haven't seen these in quite a while. So the last of the habanadas, they take so long to produce. I always have to remember to start these earlier than my other peppers because I want a bigger plant to come out. Shishitos, a little bit on the struggle bus. That's the plant that earlier in the season was eaten by the hornworm. It's been a long year. I can't remember. Not a banana pepper, giant Marconi. And this is one of the nicely producing jalapenos, banana peppers. I've not done any pickling of peppers this year. And so once we figure out how many we have off of these plants, I'm definitely going to do that. More shishito peppers. I didn't intentionally plant 3 plants, but this is where we ended up. And then I have habaneros. So the habanada is the mild with the same flavor as the habanero, and the habanero, the original, is the hot. And then poblanos, a little bit of damage. Like this I'll cut off. Just if you're thinking about kind of what and where to plant next year, I am all about containers and peppers. They just year over year do really well for me. And I may need to move these carrots to see if we can get, I don't know, a little bit longer growing. I've never been able to overwinter carrots, not that I've intentionally tried, but yeah, we'll take them as babies though. So one of my favorite rows that I created of containers, and by the time we get to the end of the season, they don't look as great, but I have some more jalapenos. This is the sweet potato in the container. I can't help myself. I'm always curious about things growing in containers versus in ground. And these were, if you saw the video where I was planting out the 2 beds in the center, these were the, I don't know, I've been calling them garlic scallions or something, that we pulled up. And I was supposed to take them in that day, but I never got to it. So I basically ended up putting them in some soil to keep them fresh, if that makes sense. So this is the bed we're overwintering spinach, and it was just recently planted. Winter. This is the hope that I have when it comes to like planting later in the season. I've not been able to really consistently plant for fall, but I kind of stumbled into this. And that's the reason why some of these crops really aren't fall and cool weather crops, because I kind of planted what I had on hand. So I have a bunch of different basil starts that were really scraggly. I have basically been pinching off of this because it's been eaten up by the worms, cabbage worms. So these are probably, we were talking about sacrificial plants a couple of videos ago. It's probably what that is. Forward hook chard. And then this is peppermint chard, another forward hook. And these, I think it's like giant forward hook is the name. And so I have another kale plant that again is just getting eaten up by worms, cabbage worms. And I also have another bunch of basil, which will be coming out. Quick note here. So remember the bean trellis, which did put on some beans later in the season. These aren't fit to eat, but I want to make sure that I disassemble, deconstruct this trellis here, because I want to reuse it next year. Specifically, I want to make sure that I don't leave the actual trellis material out in the elements, because it did a great job for me this year, but I don't know that it's really wear and tear friendly when it comes to Chicago winters. New look at one of the greens raised beds. I still have see. Really good looking collard greens here. And you can see how I have staked them. I have one more red scarlet kale plant down here. I shared the cilantro that I dug up in a previous video. Lacinato kale. I cleaned this bed up to make sure that basically what you see are all leaves that I figure are edible. There are a couple like with this that I'd probably toss. It's a different type of worm there. It's been eating away at that plant. I'm not like, there's some things I don't mind touching, but for whatever reason I don't want to touch that worm. Maybe that's like an army worm or something. There are a couple in here. All right, we're gonna go for it. Ugh. And then I have the oregano that returns. It's basically a perennial, which I didn't realize when I planted it. I probably wouldn't have planted it there, but it actually is on either side of that raised bed. And then inside of this bed is where we cleaned up and tied up our Brussels sprouts. So since we're still before the freeze, I really haven't been able to test how these are going to do. But I am tempering my expectations. And then I have lacinato kale, a couple of plants. And these were really kind of bent over and being shaded out by the Brussels sprouts. So like these are long and tall just because of the way I've been harvesting them. Like these notches are leaves that I've harvested. But these are kind of wimpy looking just because they had been struggling for sun. That I have two more Brussels sprout plants in the back. And quiet as kept, I took the tops off of these plants in order to push energy into creating bigger Brussels sprouts. But those leaves that are left look pretty good. And these are all of the shredded leaves that I put on way back in the spring. And I can see they've broken down, but there's still some pretty good coverage. And I shared the basically trap plants again. I don't know. There's a part of me that thinks like letting these worms continue to feast on these plants maybe isn't the best idea. That's what they're doing now though. I also am thinking that one or two will be left in the grow bags because they may return next year. We'll see. And if they return next year, in the early part of the year, they'll be a lot more healthy. All right, so we have two more groups of beds to look at. We're going to take a look at this tomato space, basically. And we'll talk about why there's a tarp on top. And then our main collard green bed here. Okay, doke, so we have our row cover that we've been using all year long on this bed that has collard greens and one cabbage plant. And so I can already tell, and this is the row cover, it's really for frost protection. Oh, those are pretty. But because of what I was doing earlier in the spring and how I was planting these, I thought, let's give it a try and see if it works throughout the season, which it has. Unfortunately, I have had a situation where these greens have grown up and into the frost cover and ultimately created some holes. I'm watching a squirrel peruse around my deck looking for something to snack on. Go ahead and go somewhere else. Go, go, go. I don't chase them away. I don't chase them away every time, but this is about here. Now there is some damage to some leaves, so my intention is going to be similar to these other two beds, let's clean these up and see what we're really working with. Let's see if we have any real damage we need to be concerned about. So yeah, so this is poor thing. This plant has basically fallen onto these other two plants. The only bright side to this is it didn't allow them to continue to grow up, which would continue to present a problem with the frost cover. But it's very easy for this stem to split, which has happened to me before in the past. That red cabbage, boy, should I have harvested that some time back. Now, although the frost cover, the row cover has some holes, just based on how much length it's covering, I think it's like a 12-foot bed, I should probably be able to cut it in a way where I could use it in other parts of the garden for its exact purpose and not have to worry about where the holes are kind of impeding on the coverage it's providing. But yeah, this is, if you've grown greens, get! I can't believe your boldness. Get! All right. I'm actually going to put that. That's that container of carrots I was just talking about that I'm going to put inside of the cage, I think. All right. We're going to take a closer look at these plants, but we're going to do the exact same thing that we did in the other two beds on either side. Clean up any leaves that I wouldn't eat, but also stake up some of these plants, because we know that for these greens, they're hardy, right? You know, so this frost is going to be nothing for them. Even the freezing temps, I probably will lighten the, let's wait until we get past the first freeze. Let's see. The trouble with letting them get kissed by frost is the temperatures are going to get down to freezing overnight for like the next 4 nights. So these plants may or may not bounce back during the day. So I could be letting them go, and basically once we get to, well into the 40s next week, then come back and harvest. And that's fine too. So I think once we do the harvest for the rest of the garden, I'll see how much I have to work with. And again, I'll decide whether or not I want to harvest any of these hardy greens. So this is not really a good plan here. So I have this tarp on here because we've been getting so much rain this week. And I'd already seen a couple of tomatoes cracking. And I thought, if I can prevent the rain kind of directly just pouring onto this bed, perhaps I could prevent some tomatoes from cracking. Kind of uneven watering is what, as I understand it, contributes to the cracking. But this was really like kind of last minute. And let's see if we can get that steady. One of the things that we know, we talked about this when we were building this raised bed, or at least covering the raised bed after planting, you really need to have some type of slope when it comes to these things. Otherwise, you could have the space kind of cave in. And that's definitely not what we want when it comes to this. And it's too heavy for me to kind of just pull up and toss the water out. So here I am. The tarp probably would have been better served on top of at least one of those plantings of sweet potatoes instead of this. So a better design would have been to have a slope or even like an A-frame if I wanted to really do this in a serious way. Okie doke, so both these two beds and this structure is just a winner this season. So pleased with how everything grew in here, the production, the goal of preventing squirrels from getting to tomatoes. This structure worked, and I'm definitely going to reuse this structure next season when I plant tomatoes. I have 5 tomato plants in here. On the far end, there is Aroma, determinate variety, so it's really long stopped producing tomatoes of any noteworthy size. 2 pineapple which if you don't know, you're about to know that pineapple is probably my favorite tomato. And this is probably most notably a tomato that produced all the way until the end. There definitely are a couple that have cracked based on the rain that we've just had. But I mean, this tomato is it. My favorite way to use it is actually eating it fresh. It makes for a great salsa as well. I have Cherokee Purple and Boxcar Willie, which are kind of intertwined. When Boxcar Willie produces in the season, it's a beautiful red tomato. Once it begins to struggle, I've noticed that the fruit are just smaller. And so that's what you'll see here. And then the Cherokee Purple, gosh, this is one of those things where, you know, you had more time and more heat. And then I have a couple of pepper plants in here, sweet peppers. That is, I think it's the giant Spanish mammoth. Spanish mammoth is the name of it. And then I have some bell peppers, more bell peppers. Got one that's definitely damaged here that I won't be able to enjoy, but that's okay. And then I have basil, which is a bit worse for wear, but I definitely get a chance to save some seeds. And there are a handful of leaves that are probably going to be edible. Like all of these I'll end up tossing. This is, I'm pretty sure, cold damage. But this is the lettuce leaf basil, kind of a crinkly leaf, but it puts on huge leaves when it's really producing. And then I have the typical sweet Genovese basil. And because you probably haven't heard this if you've watched any previous videos, and thank you, I had onions tucked in here. The worst place I could have ever planted onions, just based on how large everything got in this bed. But always lessons to learn or relearn many times. Okie doke, so I appreciate y'all spending some time with me. If you have any questions or comments, as always, feel free to drop them below. And I look forward to seeing y'all on the next one.